Hi, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Evolving Media podcast, where I, together with guests, try to make sense of the changing world of media and look at how we as producers, creators, and all-around storytellers can thrive in these new circumstances, challenges, and possibilities that we're coming up against. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the world of documentary filmmaking. My guest is Jan Rofekamp, who started his company Films Transit in 1982 and has been a sales agent, producer, and executive producer for a great number of documentary films since then. I met him when he was the director for the Documentary Campus Master School last year, and I can think of few people who better would be in a position to talk about what's happening with the world of documentary filmmaking and what the future might look like. Let's dive in with Jan participating on a slightly challenging telephone landline from Athens, Greece. So just let me start by saying that, Jan, I'm very happy that you agreed to join this podcast and talk a little bit about your experiences from the documentary field and what you see happening today and perhaps for the foreseeable future as well. Now, you're in Greece, and I am envious of you. Just tell me a little bit about the weather there right now.
The weather is actually quite nice. It's like probably 18 degrees. It's sunny. I did my morning walk, and I could do this not in my t-shirt, but in a sweater, instead of the thick Canadian coats that I used to wear when I was living in Kalmar. But it's okay. I mean, it's not swimming weather, but it's almost.
Oh yeah,
I'm not. We go out for dinner, and we may.
Yeah, okay. That's enough. I'm becoming.
All right, so maybe it's interesting, Simon, to sketch a little bit of history to place, and to find out why the documentary world is where it is now.
Absolutely.
I've been working with Film Transit, my company, since '82. Before I was in Holland in distribution, in all kind of parallel distribution mechanisms, sort of cinema clubs and stuff like this. I see three major events that sort of changed this whole landscape over the last decades. And the first was the arrival of video, of portable video, also for filmmaking, which is the mid-70s. And then in the mid-80s, the specialty channels started to come up. These were before there was only public broadcasting, but then all of a sudden there were like National Geographic and there was Discovery Channel. And I think that these specialty channels in the mid-80s sort of increased the overall interest in documentary format. All of a sudden, these people started to buy a lot. Now, later, they started to produce a lot, buy a lot in the beginning. And the documentary world reacted also at the same period of time, mid-80s, late 80s. The documentary world started to organize itself in festivals and markets. ITFA started to become important, and you see now there's a whole lot of documentary events and film festivals all over the world that all started in that period. The third big event we are right in the middle of now, which is the online business, the online revolution that will completely change the landscape.
So, I mean, we're in the as you said, we're in the midst of the third revolution right now, which is the online business, which is starting to take shape and has been taking shape for some years now. But people are still looking to find the right way and the right way to approach it. What do you see from your point of view? If you're a new up and coming producer, how do you approach today's world? Is it a mix of the old, like, traditional ways combined with the new, or how would you see that people approach?
It's very interesting. Recently, I was part of the documentary campus in Leipzig, and in Leipzig there's this pitch event where a number of documentary projects are pitched for potential clients, and all of a sudden I realized that the people around the table were actually still the classic documentary buyers. And I also realized that the people who are proposing projects, most of them still just want to make an ordinary documentary. So there's this whole world, the whole new world around us that sort of makes us excited and tries to invite us to consider new formats and new shapes. But the hardcore of the documentary world is still the classic documentary, which is quite interesting, actually. Now, the problem that we find is that out of the 80s came those broadcasters as the main supporters for the documentary genre. The broadcasters are a bit in trouble. You see all over Europe, the broadcasters are under cutbacks from their governments, and what has to replace basically that sort of source of revenue should be the online world. The problem is that we're not really there yet. You see that funding for documentary production is still the classic film funds in the different countries combined with broadcast and maybe here and there some theatrical. But the new world, call it the new world, is not really in place yet to replace what is actually slowly moving away from the documentary world, which is the broadcast.
I guess it's the thing with the online world. Most people have for years now been used to getting almost everything for free online, right? Whereas it takes money to make a good documentary film.
That's absolutely true. I mean, there are still producers that I know who basically take stuff from the internet and think it's free to use in their movies, which is quite amazing. But I mean, but that's true. But there's a concept of the internet is free. That means that the willingness of an audience to pay for it, it's still not really there yet, I think. That's why if you try to launch your documentary films through the online, the most important thing to think of is to find groups out there, audience groups out there linked to your subject matter, so they find interest in a direct way in the film that you have to offer.
So a couple of episodes ago, I had Mike Monello on here talking about when they launched Video Palace, which was a horror drama podcast. That they use a podcast to start up the franchise or the IP, and then they look to enhance it into perhaps books or films or whatever. So do you feel that because most documentary filmmakers I talk to are eager to make a documentary film, which is quite natural. Yeah. But perhaps it would be reason to look at what the idea or the topic you're addressing and see if there is some other place where you can start the narrative and start reaching out to these people and start building the momentum that will then finally end up in a film.
Well, I mean, I've seen situations. I've done, and I'm still doing quite a bit of what we call debriefing after these pitch sessions. So people are pitching the project, and people make comments, and myself and other people we debrief those filmmakers to discuss with them after the pitch. So what happened at the table, and what kind of conclusions you can draw. And there are moments that I've said to people, you know what? Maybe what you want to do, maybe it's better to do something online instead of making a classic documentary, because if the real market, the classic broadcasters are slowly slipping away because of political support, the lack of political support. The theatrical market is a complete nightmare and basically dependent on big names, the draw of big names, the Herzogs, and maybe now the Kosakowski filmmaker, they get maybe some theatrical exposure. But and then the DVD market is gone. There are still a few countries where it still is an issue, but most of the countries it doesn't really exist anymore. So if you want to spend 2 years of your life, 3 years of your life trying to get funding for a documentary which is has a budget of 400,000 euros, maybe it's just sometimes not that such a good idea anymore. And maybe if you are looking for your story for an audience, for public, there are other ways to find these people. And then those filmmakers look at me and say, oh my God, but I want to make a documentary. And the reality of making a documentary and the reality of the success of a documentary, it's become very, 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 very iffy,
Mm. So do you feel that documentary films have a future as a storytelling method?
That's a very good question. If you look at the possibilities where to show them, and yes, it's true. I mean, there are the real theatrical setting where people watch a film with an audience on a big screen is still an extraordinary experience. But it's become so expensive and there are so many films on the market. sometimes I don't know. I mean, if of that documentary, the classic documentary genre still has a future. I mean, as long as public broadcast exists, and I hope it will exist still for a long time to come, there will be interest in documentary. I'm sure. Whether it's so widespread and whether it's so massive, I'm not so sure about it. It really, really depends on the political support that these broadcasters receive from their governments. I think that another future for docs is a different format. I mean, the classic feature doc or the classic 1 hour format that we've known for so many years, the online world is very different. The attention span of people is very, very different. So you'll see storytelling in the form of documentary probably continue, but in slightly different forms. And I mean, I see projects being pitched, and I talk to filmmakers afterwards, and I say, you know what? Maybe it's a better option to chop your film up in short little pieces and put them online via online mechanisms, instead of making a documentary, going through all that long process and ending up with a TV sale to Holland and to a small channel in Spain and maybe Bulgaria. You know, that's a real problem. The other problem that I have to signal is that since that documentary world has grown into something which seems to be very popular, there are a lot of organizations to help those documentary filmmakers, and all these organizations invite people basically to become part of this very, very sort of nice world. It caused an incredible increase in the number of filmmakers. Also, of course, the fact that it's potentially cheaper to make those documentaries. An incredible increase in documentary filmmakers. So I just recently, just a few days ago, I saw a post somewhere where the Sundance Film Festival had this year more than 14,000 submissions. I mean, can you believe 14,000 submissions of documentaries? Wow. Not documentary, and fiction, of course. And that's quite amazing. I mean, that has been increasing over the years, but now it's reaching numbers that make the viability of your film in a market situation very, very hard, very, very difficult. I mean, in my job, we spent a lot of time. I spend a lot of time pushing the films that I represent for international film festivals to make them seen, to make them being noticed. Even to the point that, for instance, if you talk about ITFA or maybe Berlin or another festival, that I don't really care if it's in competition as long as it's there, as long as it's in the program. I just was in ITFA, and we have the video library, the Docs for Sale video library, and you notice very clearly that because of the massive numbers of the buyers, the clients, and the potentially interested parties, they watch the films that are in the selection. I have like 10 films in the video market, and the films that are most watched are the films that are in the program. You know, it's like almost like a natural pre-selection that's happening. But it makes it very hard and very difficult. I'm not even talking about the prices that people pay for films, but that's another story.
That's another story, yeah, for sure. But do you feel that producers nowadays, they need, or creators, or whatever you want to call them, needs to be a jack of almost all trades? I mean, you need to know about the production side, of course. You need to have a grasp on direction, but you also need to be looking actively for funding, and you need to be selling, but you also need to do audience outreach and be the face of the project towards the audience. I mean, it's you need to be very multifaceted today.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. But I think the question before you start to do all of these things is the one most important question if you want to make a documentary is if you want to make a documentary for your domestic audience, or if you want to make a film that you want to travel. I mean, that is a very, very important choice. I mean, I've been looking at projects for another big pitch event, and there are very clearly films that I see at this moment will never be exportable but they have a very good life at home domestically. So that question is really important. If you want to do documentaries that travel, then of course you have to spend the time to develop that trade in your company. And then another thing which is really important, if you want to make films that travel, I think it's increasingly important to find co-production partners. I mean, I did at Sunnyside last summer, I did a little job for a Canadian producer, an experienced Canadian producer who wanted to have links with companies in France, England, and Germany, and I set up about 15 meetings with producers so that they can actually create that network. With funding in not in all countries, but in some countries in jeopardy, you need to build relationships. I think building relationships with producers in other countries is a very good idea.
One final question as we're wrapping up this episode of the podcast, and I'll be, as I said, I'd be very happy to have you back again, because this is a topic we could discuss for hours. But what's your vision? What's your vision for the future of the documentary film field? Do you feel it's a dystopian one, a utopian one, or is it somewhere in between? Does it depend on what actions and what decisions are taken over the next couple of years?
You know, if you look around at the documentary field, filmmakers will continue to make documentaries. That's for sure. I mean, they like it and they love to do it, and they'll continue to do it. The trouble is where they will get the funding from and where they will get those films seen. That is in a bit of a turmoil, a bit of development. As I mentioned earlier, the broadcasters are having a hard time keeping their funding on a level. The theatrical business is extremely selective, but they will continue to make their films. Filmmakers will eventually find ways, I think, to monetize the online business. I mean, 5 years ago, I would not dare to give some of my films to some of those online platforms. Today, I do it. So there is a development happening. Mm. Whether it will replace the broadcast funding is to be seen. The thing with broadcast is a relatively big amount of money for one contract. You sign away broadcast rights and you get paid for it. Online is depending on viewers, is depending on clicks, and the clicks translate into money. So you need to work very, and broadcast is very simple. You deliver the film to the broadcaster, they air it, and you get paid. Online, I think filmmakers in the future will have to be involved in the distribution of their films and work with the distributor in order to get those clicks. I mean, I'm involved in a film called Dolphin Man, which is a Greek-French-Canadian co-production about Jacques Mayol, the free diver from the 60s and the 70s. Mm-hmm. And we are made a deal with an online sales agent, so an online company, a company that actually sells to the different online platforms, but we are mobilizing the American Freedivers Association.
Yeah,
these are the people who are doing what Jacques Mayol did. And they are getting behind the rollout, which is actually happening I think, tomorrow, on December 4th, with blogs, with internet posts, with all kinds of things. And that is the way to go. You have to find, for the future, concerned groups in society, concerned organized groups that can support your attempt to get as many clicks as possible. That's the key thing. What you now see in these market events, these seminars about outreach, these seminars about audience finding, is really, really important, because that is the way to go, I guess.
And it's
I think I'm quite sure.
It's going to be so interesting to see how it evolves. And I look forward to having you back on the podcast in a while to discuss what's been happening over the winter and so forth. But I'll let you get back to your plus 18 degrees and your dinner outside and all those things that I'm not envious about at all. And I'll talk to you in a bit. Thank you very much, Jan.
Yeah, we can swim in this. We can still swim in the sea, but you guys also swim in the very cold water. Huh?
Yeah, we just need to dig a hole in the ice first, and then we'll swim in the sea,
sea
as well.
All right, Sam. I hope it's okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.